39.6%. That's the amount of the provincial budget right now that's dedicated for the health sector. It's by far the biggest portion. Healthcare is really expensive, it's really complex, and the reality is at the end of the day, if you want your local hospital to have a surgical robot, if you want your local hospital, in this case regional, to bring in a PET CT scanner, the community has to step up and support it. Government funding, already the biggest portion of the provincial budget, goes a long way to funding operations, but at the end of the day, it keeps things adequate. If you want excellent healthcare in your community, if you want to equip professionals, talented professionals like Dr. Mather, that's why foundations exist in this country, and that's why it's so important to support them. And that's what we're talking about today.
Okay, what is fundraising? Like, is it raffles? Is it bake sales? Sure, but it's a lot more. The government doesn't cover everything. Donors have to make up the difference. Like that MRI you had after a hockey injury. Donors paid for that. Those paddles that shocked your grandpa back to life. Donors paid for that. Replacing these smart pumps, funded by donors. Treating my lymphoma at the cancer center, funded by donors. What are the nuts and bolts of fundraising? Like, how does it work? Why is it so important to support local? And how do hospital workers feel when they're using equipment funded by the community? We are going to talk to two people who help make it happen. We got Stephen McDonald from Lakeridge Health Foundation. He has years of experience raising millions of dollars, and he's got a personal connection too. Growing up in Port Perry, his mom was a nurse. This means a lot to him. We're also going to chat with Dr. Arun Mather. He's a urologist and a donor, so he sees it on both sides. We're going to have a great conversation about how the foundation gets money and how the foundation spends money, how it finds out from hospital workers, from the people using the equipment, what they need, and how this is transforming healthcare in our community. So let's brace for impact with Stephen McDonald and Dr. Arun Mather.
Durham region is one of the fastest growing metropolitan areas in the country. We anticipate, with regard to cancer care alone, a 58% increase in cancer cases over the next 20 years.
In Durham specifically?
In Durham specifically, and a large part of that is because of the growing population. So we need to be able to keep up to what's going on in Durham region with regard to our healthcare. So donations to Lakeridge Health Foundation are only going to become more and more important over the coming years. Again, we're growing so rapidly, we need to keep up with the healthcare in this region.
What we call the people coming here to get their healthcare is the catchment area. So our catchment area varies depending on what you're talking about. So for example, the only regional thoracic center is us. So for thoracic care, you're going well past Peterborough, well past Cobourg, Belleville, because we are the regional thoracic center. When it comes to, for example, my specialty, urology, Peterborough has urologists. So we're not going to see a lot of urologic patients coming from there, but we don't have any urologists in Cobourg and Port Hope and down that direction. So we're catching patients from that area coming out this way. Probably closer to 600,000 for the Durham region. But our catchment of what group of people that the population of people that the hospital has to service is probably closer to 800,000 plus.
Kind of like an extended family.
Exactly.
Like when you say your family, are you including your wacky Aunt Karen or whatever?
And sometimes you have to, sometimes you don't.
Have to.
Depends what
holidays, typically holidays, right?
And RS McLaughlin Durham Regional Cancer Center, because it's the hub for the Central East Regional Cancer Program, that catchment's 1.6 million people.
Damn.
There you go. See,
to give you a frame of reference, we go as far north as into the Halliburton Highlands, as far east as Campbellford, Brighton, and then to the west, we actually touch into Scarborough. So a massive catchment for the cancer center.
Yeah. So and that population, as Steve mentioned, it is growing rapidly. There's the immigration component. There's just general. We've had a lot of younger people coming in this area. You look at the housing situation.
Because we're cool. That's why they want to be here. That's why everyone's coming here.
I think it's more that housing's cheaper. You can get a house here that's not $3 million.
No,
so that makes
it's 2.4.
Nowadays, you're probably right, but. So there's a number of reasons why people are coming out in this area, but it's growing rapidly.
The communities that have the best care are those that support their hospital foundations.
And the community's growing, and I can even remember when I was a kid, when they changed I grew up in Whitby, they would change the population on the sign, and it was a big deal. And I think when I was in third or fourth grade, it was like 50,000 people, and then it was like 68,000 and 78,000.
When I first started here, I didn't have much thought about the foundation. It didn't cross my mind. I was a new urologist, new physician working. I was young, you're bulletproof. And a couple of things changed that view. One was my wife. My wife developed Parkinson's disease 26 years ago. that changes your perspective. When you have a chronic illness and you're the one to really connect with that with Hodgkin's.
Well, but they're different. Like my Hodgkin's isn't, we hope it's gone forever, but like, yeah, there are lingering effects.
But it's a health entity that
Sure.
shakes you to the core.
Yeah.
And when you get shaken to the core like that, then you have a really different perspective on life. But in the last, 5 to 10 years, these changes that the foundation did, coupled with changes in my life with individuals that are sick, that's what changed my view to the foundation and why I got involved and try to get more and more physicians and people in the community involved. It's
How do
our
you do that
hospital.
though? Like coworkers, for instance.
Day-to-day work, it's hard. But once a year, my wife and I open our doors and we have any of the physicians that are available come to our house from the hospital. We serve dinner, some drinks, supported by the foundation. And we're not there to get a check from anybody. We're not there to get donations for the future or volunteering. We just want to bring awareness of what the foundation does and any way they could plug into it. We go to a lot of the events. For better or for worse, I happen to hit a lot of these things. The foundation asked me to do, whether it's radio broadcasts or this podcast, for example, other publicity and marketing events. So I get involved with that. And shockingly, people see that because I get patients all the time saying, "Doc, I saw your picture in the paper the other day." Or
You're like,
this or that."
which column was it in?
But
Which
that's
section?
right.
Which section?
Luckily in the good section. But that opens doors.
Yeah.
Because then as soon as they say that, I say, well, funny you should ask that. And then I start into a little bit of a short, what is a 30-second elevator spiel?
Yeah.
Or a longer, at a dinner party, spiel of what the foundation does and how they can get involved. And, nowadays we have access to incredible resources to get the word out, whether it's social media, whether it's TikTok and these types of things, whether it's direct marketing. I mean, in the old days, it was a newspaper ad and that was it.
Well, again, you get back to like 100 years ago, right? The things that we did to communicate with each other, and the way that we communicate now is rooted in that. We've developed better ways of doing that. We've developed more nuanced ways of doing it, and we've developed more like more ways that are tailored to individuals, right?
Yeah.
Like one of my favorite expressions is "the medium is the message," right? Marshall McLuhan.
Yes.
You need to meet people where they are, and you need to communicate that in a way that they feel like they have ownership. And so I'm curious how you make that emotional appeal to people, because you can make a logical appeal to people and they'll get it, right? But
You can. Stories are always really good. And a lot of people I talk to, whether it's physicians or people in the public, outside of, somebody who might be 19 years old and they're bulletproof and healthy as a horse, majority of the people have connections with individuals that are ill, have gone through a surgical procedure, chemo, something like that. And trying to make a connection with that story of that individual really works well.
yeah,
My story. My wife is huge online presence because of Parkinson's. She's a huge advocate, researcher. She sits on a zillion different organizations. She's working with the WHO right now and their Brain Health Initiative. So her name gets out there quite a bit among patients of mine and other individuals. They say, "Hey, I saw your wife on that." And I just use that as a crack in the door.
again, you're like,
to
which
get my foot in
section of the
there.
newspaper? Where did you see her? Was it good? Was it bad?
But yeah, I get that crack in the door. And as soon as I get my foot in, and then I start that conversation.
Yeah.
And that's where I try to get my colleagues thinking in that same way. The more of us that think like that and get the word out, the more we have ownership of the hospital and the more we're going to invest in the hospital.
Well, and I'm sure it's incredibly validating as well, because it's a lot that goes into advocacy work, right? It's a lot like these events that you're throwing in your home. Like that's a lot. The advocacy that you're doing, with projects like this, for instance, like it's a lot. And I appreciate your time, and I know that everybody appreciates your time. And so I'm sure to have a patient say to you, or just a stranger say to you, "This really impacted me. This gave me some information. This is how is going to help me make better health decisions." Like, what does that feel like for you?
It's huge. I mean, to get that, I don't want to call it validation, but it feels like I'm making a change in the world. Okay.
But what's not validating about that?
I'll tell you how it really feels. And this is a true story from 2.5 weeks ago. So my wife was speaking at the European Association of Neurologists conference in Helsinki, Finland. So we were in Finland. She was speaking there, guest speaker, etc. We got back to the airport. We're in the lounge, getting ready to fly back. 9 hours to get back to Toronto. And we're sitting there as we're walking in. My wife was beside me, and this lady, about 50, 51 years old, stands up right in front of her, a Finnish lady. And she says with a heavy Finnish accent, "Thank you for existing."
Damn.
And I said, "Excuse me?"
Steve.
So I kind of
What?
got kind of like, "Oh, this is weird." What? So I said, "Excuse me?" And she looked at me and she said, "A year and a half ago, I just got diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And I've been following your wife all over the internet and seeing all the webinars and whatnot. And she's a social worker and she was heading to see some family or something, I can't remember. We spent 15 minutes talking about her disease now. And she said basically that she was ready to give up at 51 years of age, quit her career and just stay at home and just baby this disease. And when she saw what my wife went through, she turned around and said, no, that's not going to happen. She doubled down on her career, worked harder, started getting into advocacy work, philanthropy work, et cetera, and changed her life. That little 2-minute interchange changed how my wife felt about, okay, I'm doing something right. I'm making some impact in the world. I operate every day. I see patients all the time. I have patients donating to the hospital who come point blank to tell me and say, listen, you saved my life. I gave this money to the hospital. To me, every single day I hear that, it's like that moment 2 weeks ago in that lounge at the airport. It's just over and over again. And so if you think about that story, how it made you feel for that split second, I feel that every day when I see people talking to me about that. And I wish more and more physicians and more people that are involved with the hospital and the foundation feel the same thing. And then we really move mountains at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you claim credit? Because it's difficult, right? Like, I think there's the Canadian element of it, right? We're all brainwashed to be humble, but the foundation does such amazing work. I mean, I think that I'm alive today in part because of some of the work that the foundation has done. And certainly being able to get cancer care in my own community made things a lot easier. Being able to, I had a stem cell transplant at Princess Margaret, but I was able to recover at Lake Ridge, which meant that it was a 5-minute drive away from my wife, which meant that she had no excuse not to visit me, right? And there goes the excuse. It's like that expression, like success begets success, right? How are you able to claim all of these wins to encourage people to keep donating money, to encourage people to even just keep advocating on behalf of the foundation?
The approach I take, and many of us take it at our foundation, is I don't go out to claim any wins about what I've done. The wins that I see are what donors have done. And it's demonstrating what they've done to the community that not only says thank you to the donors themselves, but inspires the community to get up and get involved as well. So when you're talking about claiming,
I don't mean like you go up to somebody and say, hi, I'm
hey,
Steve,
look what I did.
And look how much money I
that's
paid
right,
for that thing over there. But I guess
the early days of fundraising, that happened.
how do you encourage people to see the amazing work that you're doing, right? Because again, like there's that aspect of humility to it as well, but promoting these giant wins. And of course, like this project we're working on right now is a good example of that. But how do you approach that from the foundation?
It's a mix. There are the one-on-one touch points. One of the best things we can do is bring a donor in to see the impact of what they've done. Obviously, with many, many donors, that's not always feasible. So then it gets into marketing to the masses. And one of my colleagues would be very pleased for me to say that having a strong marketing budget is essential for a foundation as well. That all comes together to communicate to the entire community the impact that donor support can have. And I'd be remiss not to say, because it stems from what we were speaking about, part of what inspires donors to give are their own experiences. It's the exceptional care they've received or that loved ones have received. As Dr. Mather was talking, I couldn't help but think about being out in West Clarington at the end of last year, sitting in front of a cozy fireplace with 2 donors, one of whom is a patient of Dr. Mather's. They support the Cancer Center because of Dr. Mather's great care.
We're all human. We like shiny things. We like pretty things. We like tech. We like whatnot. Every time we do get these devices, when we got the robot, from fundraising events over at Owasco to various entities at the hospital to certain individuals, including board members, who are also our voices of the foundation, first thing we did, had the board members come in and walk through the ORs and see the new minimally invasive suites, see the robots. It's one thing to have a brochure or a half-page ad in the newspaper. It's another thing standing in front of a $5 million robot and see the tech behind it.
It's awesome.
You've done that. You've seen it, and it's like, wow, this is pretty impressive gear.
100%.
You think your iPhone looks amazing. So, it's going down to the roots of of people. We like to see shiny things. So the foundation's done a really good job of bringing people in to see a lot of this. Hey, your dollars bought this $5 million robot, which I will then use, or we will use, to save people's lives. And that's huge.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Yeah, I hear that from the patients all the time when they get exposed to it.
And you can't have everybody walk through the hospital all the time, right? There's a lot of people in Durham region, but it's communicating that message, right? And people learn differently. Some people prefer a brochure. They prefer seeing a picture. Some people prefer a video. Some would love to hear a conversation about it, watch a webcast or something like that. And sure, I mean, the event last year I'm thinking of in particular, the gala, crazy to see this thing. Yeah. And it's set up and you can walk over and you can you can operate it. They had a technician there helping people operate this thing. And I'm sure if you could have the entirety of Durham region walk through and see something like that, you'd probably never have to ask people for money ever again.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and we try to use various techniques nowadays to market to different people. If I want to use the word marketing, and like you said, some individuals, you need that cozy fireside chat and sit down with them. And, a lot of some of the larger donors prefer that one-on-one conversation. There are a lot of other people that just want to be anonymous and write that $20 check every single month for the next 40 years and make an impact that way. Others want to show up and volunteer. So I think reaching out to people and motivating people you have to look at the audience, and the audience changes depending on where you are and how you are. I'd love to invite all of Durham region to my house and chit chat with them, but I can't. So I tackle the physicians and bring the physicians into my house and chat with them, because that's the best way to impress on them what the foundation does and what the benefit is of getting people to donate. But I wouldn't use that technique necessarily with other individuals. And the younger,
you'd have to get your carpets changed all the time, right? Come on.
Constantly.
Yeah.
I'd have to convince my wife, first of all. And then you look at the younger demographic, which is even harder, because they're like that half-a-second TikTok video impresses on them, and regular print media would go right over their heads. I don't think my kids have ever seen print media because everything's online for them. So, and I've seen in the last 5 to 7 years, the foundation really has branched out into different technology. We're sitting here having a podcast. Podcast is a relatively new concept of reaching out to the public, and I've never seen anything like this in the past from the foundation. So that in itself shows you the changes on how they're trying to reach people.
And again, it all comes back to communicating with people, right? Yeah. And that's a great point. I'm not new here, but like many people are, how do you meet and greet with those people?
We talk about that a lot at the foundation. That's quite challenging. How do you meet the new members of the community? You need to meet at least one of them and have them open doors and connect you with others. There are other avenues as well, such as our mass marketing for those who see it and pay attention to it. But that's something we as fundraisers, as a charity, we talk about on a regular basis. Durham region is one of the fastest growing regions in the country. So we have more and more people coming in. How do we let them know what Lake Ridge Health Foundation is here to do? It's tricky, and it goes beyond mass marketing. We need people, we need champions in the community to help get us connected.
I think that's key there, because different age demographics have different
interests,
different ways they can help. So you're not going to get a 19-year-old cutting a check for $500,000. That's just not going to happen.
Wish I was that 19-year-old. Damn.
But you're not going to do that. But a 19-year-old has two things I would think of. One, they're incredible at disseminating information. I mean, that's what they do, the whole concept of virality and spreading the message, because they're good at that using social media and what they have. So tapping into them for that purpose is fantastic, awareness. And the second purpose is down the road. You bring awareness in that demographic, you reap the benefits 20 years down the road when they have income, they have some degree of purpose and agency and a sense of commitment to the community.
Roots.
And then they'll start getting involved, whether it's volunteering, whether it's donating to the hospital, and they feel that need because of that early exposure. So I think that's a better word. Exposure is all I would expect from that younger demographic.
How do you give them that ownership? How do you give them power in that situation?
Do whatever you can to demonstrate the impact of what they have done. So we're speaking hypothetically here. So you're asking me if a 19-year-old gives us $50 to support cancer care because their aunt is a cancer patient.
Sure.
How would we make them feel ownership to what they've done? We would obviously thank them right away, but then we'd thank them again. And we'd follow up and make sure they're in the loop as to what's going on, what their gifts are doing.
Which again gets back to what you both have been
Exactly.
talking about this entire conversation, which is here's the impact of it.
That's right. So one example, we have a monthly e-newsletter. So
I'm subscribed. You should subscribe to the e-newsletter.
There you go. So that's one way of showing here's what we're accomplishing together. There's some ownership for that person who gave $50. It goes beyond that initial thank you. We continue to keep them up to date as to what's going on and what our foundation's accomplishing. And that in turn, if we do our jobs really well, we'll have them come back and give again.
It's relationship building.
Exactly.
That's what it
the
is.
core
It's
of
about-
fundraising is relationship
It's
building.
relationship building, and that is the core, and that's what drives it. And that relationship building creates sustainability, longevity, because wonderful to have a single $5 million donation, but just as powerful, both from a monetary point of view as well as longevity point of view, is having that $50 donation for the next 40 years.
To anyone who's giving $25, $100 together, and
It
I'm an
adds
annual
up.
donor myself, together our gifts come together to bring that money forward to go toward various priorities at the hospital. Lake Ridge Health itself has 5 hospital sites throughout Durham Region: Port Perry, Bowmanville, Oshawa, Whitby, and Ajax Pickering. Within that, there are 4 foundations. So Port Perry has its own hospital foundation, Bowmanville has its own foundation, Ajax Pickering has its own foundation, and we, Lake Ridge Health Foundation, are here to raise support for the Oshawa and Whitby sites of Lake Ridge Health. And within that realm, we're responsible for RS McLaughlin Durham Regional Cancer Center, which has the incredible regional impact we spoke
That's my
about
crew.
earlier. That's it.
That's my crew, baby.
We are fortunate for those who are supporting cancer care. I work with a donor who lives in Lindsay as an example. So our cancer care catchment with regard to fundraising goes through that area that I described earlier, as far north as Halliburton Highlands, as far east into Campbellford, far west into the fringe of Scarborough. So that's a special dynamic of our charity. I've never been at a charity like ours where if someone gives a donation to a specific area of care, such as cancer care or kidney care, because of really smart decisions made by our founding board of directors close to 50 years ago, most of our operations are covered through decisions they made then, which means that we're able to look donors in the eye who support specific areas of care and say 100% of your donation goes to that area of care. I'll repeat. If someone's supporting cancer care, 100% goes to cancer care. And I will also say that in comparison to hospitals and larger markets, one thing that's meaningful for me is when I meet with donors and they know neighbors, family members who've received care at our hospital, so they know that their donations are going to exceptional care close to home. And that was hit home for me over the past few weeks. My aunt was admitted into Emerge. Things weren't well. Within 3 days, she was having surgery. She has colon cancer. She stayed in the hospital a little while after. They had to do some drainage. They had to do biopsy. And she was describing the area where she was. And I knew, she didn't know because she's overwhelmed, but I knew she was in the interventional radiology suite. Our foundation, donors in this community, raised $5 million of the $8 million required for that suite.
Wow.
So for me, I always believed in what I did anyway, but I would go and visit her when she was in the hospital. I was obviously feeling for her, but at the same time, I was so proud of what we do.
Yeah.
Because, she's benefiting from the technology that I've helped raise money for.
That's your community coming together.
That's right.
That's huge.
That's us taking care of each other.
When I say really smart decisions made by that founding board of directors, in the mid-'70s, healthcare was doing really well financially. There was a lot of money going around, and money was going to various communities. So there were many hospital foundations established right then and there. And our founding board of directors, instead of spending the money right away, said, wait a minute, let's invest this. Let's set this charity up so it can be sustained year over year over year. And subsequent to that, boards of directors made decisions on that investment portfolio. And that investment portfolio covers a significant portion of our operating costs. That enables us to go out and raise even more money. And again, as we said, to be able to tell donors who are supporting kidney care, dialysis care, emergency care, 100% of their donations going to that area.
So it's kind of like an endowment in a sense.
Exactly.
You have a large chunk, what is it? Norway, one of those countries that has a ton of oil. They have like, what do they call it? Not a trust, something about like that, where they take like royalties from oil production, and they've got like $1 trillion or something, and then the interest generated from that, for instance. Yeah,
that's exactly what happens. It's the income generated on our investment portfolio that covers a significant portion of our operations. That's why we're able to designate 100% of donations to cancer care.
I need to come for like some financial advice, I think.
And again,
this is helpful. I like
would love
this.
to meet them and shake their hands. I've met with a family recently whose relative was one of those founding directors, and I shared with them the passion I just shared with you. I would just be so grateful to be able to meet those individuals. They were so smart.
When the ENT surgeon is operating in the sinuses, and that's the sinuses up your nose, go up into the central part of the maxilla and up into the forehead.
The thing that's blocked on me for like 6 months a year.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when you have to go up there and operate, let's say you have to take a tumor or a polyp or do something, you're kind of going a little bit blindly, tiny little holes with these little scopes, et cetera, trying to get your work done. There is this mapping system that can 3D map all that. And when you're up there, the difference between being in the sinus to being a few millimeters this way and you're seeing cerebral spinal fluid coming out of your brain is only a few millimeters. So you have to be extremely careful when you're working up there. $350,000 bought this amazing 3D mapping system, which was a standard of care in the NT department, to be able to do that surgery safely, effectively, and fast. And that was when we got that unit, and it arrived. The day it arrived, we got a picture of one of our surgeons who had requested it up against it, giving a big kiss to the device, because he'd been advocating for that for years and years. But that gives you an idea of what we can do with that kind of money.
Damn. Let's see you outdo that, Steve. Come on, good luck.
Really
He can outdo that.
My answer cheats a little bit because it would be multiples. We'd buy 10 of them, but ultrasounds. So picture portable ultrasounds going around the hospital, whether it be in the emergency room or in critical care areas. Many of us have had ultrasounds. That's one example. That's $80,000 a pop.
And getting one of those, because I was an inpatient for a while, getting one of those things in bed instead of having to like get out. Oh my God, that's the life of luxury right there.
And that's why multiples are important, because having multiple ultrasounds at the hospital can 100%. Have the impact that we just shared.
Yeah.
An incubator in our neonatal intensive care unit, that's around $75,000.
So that's 10 incubators.
Yeah, there you go, exactly. Dialysis, kidney care.
Yeah.
There's a machine that cleans the water that's used in the dialysis treatment. That's about, I believe it's just shy of $700,000.
So hold on, that's a dialysis machine for the dialysis machine, essentially.
Exactly. It's a larger machine that cleans the water that's used in the smaller machines that actually provide the dialysis.
But the tough part, culture, is that a lot of us think, and I hear this a lot, why isn't the government paying? Why am I paying for this? Why doesn't the government pay for this? And the sad reality is, we're in a situation where all this equipment costs a lot of money. Technology is changing very rapidly.
Sure.
In a matter of years, 5-6 years, a device which was state of the art becomes obsolete as we move on to the next level of device.
Standard of care keeps
keeps
changing all the time.
And in a system where we have infrastructure issues, we have policing issues, and other areas where the education, with big budget, it goes into education. Healthcare, as Stephen mentioned, is a big part of the budget, but it does strap the government's budget. They can't. It's not sustainable to keep spending that much money in healthcare and keeping up with all the technologies. So, in an ideal world, it would be great because I pay 50 X number of percent taxes, that my taxes should pay for all that. Why do I have to put an extra penny into it? But the reality is that tax money covers a lot of other things. And yes, a big chunk of that does come to healthcare, but healthcare is changing so rapidly. And when you walk in, we all want the latest tech. We all want the robot to do the work. Well, why am I going to have that old procedure when I can have this new procedure.
That you saw on
I want
TikTok,
that.
right?
Yeah, and I
Take
saw
it
on
back to
TikTok.
that.
Or I want my dad to have the latest this. I want my mom to have the latest this. So we all say that, and we want that. We desire that for our loved ones. But we're not going to cover all that in our taxes. And it's a sad reality of the situation, but it is the situation.
It's incredibly inspiring and motivating, I think, for people to go like, well, if we want this, like we can get this.
Yeah.
It's going to take some work. And also everybody's overworked. Like,
Yeah.
the economy's not economying so hot right now, but it's, I think it's freeing in a sense to know that you can exact this change. It takes a lot of work. You got to knock on a lot of doors. I'm being incredibly simplistic about this, but like, we can truly get this done.
And it's very visceral and here and now. We like that instant gratification. So I give $100 in taxes, and that $100 somehow goes partly federally, partly provincially, gets divvied up. Some of it goes to other provinces because some provinces get more, some provinces get less for healthcare funding from the federal government. Provincial government that puts some of it into roads, some goes in, et cetera, et cetera. Somehow, small part of that probably in some capacity filters back to Lake Ridge Health.
Yeah.
I donate $100 to Steve. I can walk in any time and say to Steve, I want to see the machine that $100 paid for. And I can even say, and I donate every year, and my donation is tied to the cancer program because I am heavily involved in cancer surgery. So I have a vested interest, and my family. But I can walk in and see that. Culture, you can walk in and ask any time, and with the right timing and whatnot. And
I'm banging down the door at 3 in the morning. Let me
I
in,
want to see
Steve.
it now.
Where's
That's
Steve?
right. But principally, you see a direct result of that $100 you gave. And that's a completely different feeling than paying your taxes to CRA every year, and somehow that ends up in your doorstep.
And
helps
you get a tax receipt from this, right?
tax
Come
receipt,
on.
Part of
Yeah.
what government policy has done
Yeah.
with regard to charitable receipting, because yes, we do get tax benefits as a result. It puts the power in our hands as donors to make choices about where the money's spent in our community. That's part of why the policies are set up the way they are. We, as individuals, can pay a lot to CRA and taxes and just let the government decide where it all goes, or we can
Take
make our own
ownership,
donations
yeah.
and say, do you know what? I want to support local healthcare. And then I get a charitable donation receipt as a result of that. There's a great deal of talk in our sector about that.
It's interesting. You'll see, and I think all levels of government do this, you'll see a road under construction. And you'll see a big sign, and it'll say, brought to you by the Ontario government, or, your tax dollars at work or whatever. Maybe that, like you got brand new chairs, by the way, in the cancer center waiting
Yes,
room.
yeah.
Little placards on there, brought to you by Steve, right? Steve and the gang.
So we do that. Certain parts have, when we have a big donor, there are, for example, our endoscopy suite in urology. We had a donor probably about 14, 15 years ago. And so we have a big sign generously donated by so-and-so. So sometimes when people donate, I think you guys do give them the option of naming if they so
We
desire.
do.
That'd be so
we
cool.
have
Yeah.
recognition plaques throughout the hospital, and we have donor walls.
Yeah.
And that also is something that inspires others to give.
Yeah.
People will walk up to those donor walls and see that a business they deal with, or a neighbor or a friend has supported the hospital foundation, and that inspires them to give.
100%.
I got a great story with that. So this is funny. So you know the story. So I donated X amount of dollars, and I think it ended up on donor wall or someplace. Yeah. And my father was 90 years old. It was a few years back. He goes by. He was there for some lab test or something. He's walking by and he sees it. Oh.
Sees a picture of you.
No, sees the donation on the donor wall or something. Written there, what I donated. Junior donated a reasonable amount of money there. Calls me up. Says, I want to talk to the CEO of the foundation. So he calls up Eve, I think.
Yes.
And he says, how much did Junior there donate? And he cuts a check for, I think, $1 more or something
my
stupid
God.
like that. So the following year, I said, I'm not letting my old man beat me. So we started getting back and forth into a little bit like that, trying to make sure I outdo him and he tries to outdo me. So yeah, it has an impact right in my own family.
I love that.
But that also is going to have an impact. And I do see people walking by all the time looking at, look at that. Look at what so-and-so gave on the donor wall that we have. Because
Don't want to be outdone.
Don't want to be outdone.
Right?
And if that's what it takes to get money in, hey, I'm all for competition.
When the fundraising comes in,
Yes.
how do you decide who gets it? How do you divvy it out?
We divvy it out by knowing in advance what the priorities are. So
How do you make sure you're a priority?
Complicated.
Okay.
So priorities vary. The administration's going to have one priority, the public will have a priority, and the physicians will have a priority. And then so we have to have some degree of discussion in there. So it's not really like I get to go walk in and say, Steve, let's go for dinner, a couple of drinks, and let's talk business here. That's not a fair way of doing it. At the end of the day, it's not public purse, but it is public purse. It's not coming from the government, but it's coming directly from the people. So when it's coming from the people like that, we have to, do justice to the money. So in the hospital, what we try to do, like most institutions, we'll sit down as physicians together, talk about what are our internal priorities, sit down with administration, because we don't always know exactly what the priorities will be there. I might talk about surgical equipment that's going to help me in the OR, but we may have a boiler in the other part of the hospital that's falling apart, and we're not getting funding for that boiler, which has nothing to do with me, and I wouldn't know much about it, but that may be a high priority to keep the operating rooms running.
So how do you triage it?
So from our side, we try to come up with a short list between the administration and their priorities, our priorities, see what the public wants. And I hate to say it, there's also somewhat of a public demand. We recently got a robot in. And there was definitely a strong need for that for a number of medical reasons. But there was also public demand. When you sit back and every time you Google surgery, cancer surgery, you hear about this thing called the Da Vinci robot, all over the US. And you hear about Toronto Hospital has it, Humber has it, Credit Valley has it. So when you see all these hospitals having it, you kind of think, why don't I have it? I'm in Lakeridge. My dad's going to have surgery. My mom's going to have surgery, cancer surgery. Why don't we have it? So there's somewhat of a demand also that we perceive as physicians, and I think the foundation perceives from the public. And then at the end of the day, I think Steve can talk a little bit more about when they see this so-called wish list, how they put that together with the administration of physicians.
So on our side, we're our own entity. We're a registered charity. So the hospital will put forward its priorities to us. And then we, through our board of directors, we have our own independent board of directors. It is they who decide on what will proceed with regard to fundraising. So 3 examples over the past couple of years, as Dr. Mather said, surgical robot. I was at the board meeting where our board of directors said, yes, we will commit to raising $5.1 million.
That's nuts. I've seen the robot, by the way. Robot. We're doing it in another episode. It's intimidating.
Yes,
that's a big piece of equipment.
Very intimidating. But
it's amazing what it does, though.
But you want to see how that came to fruition. It's a crazy story for that.
Yeah.
So we saw a lot of material about the robot over the last decade almost coming out in the literature, whether it's on TV, it's in the internet, public talks about it, patients ask for it. Hey, do we have the robot? On top of that, as physicians, we see it all over the place. But at $5 million, is it roughly?
Yes.
At $5 million a pop, it was kind of not even in the radar. Nothing we could get from the hospital. The government said, we'll pay for the operations, but we're not going to pay for the machine. There's pockets of money for capital expenditure. There's pockets of money for operations and ongoing expenses. And they're 2 separate pockets, often not connected. How many times have you heard in businesses, right, especially in government, where they say, well, we have another X number of dollars sitting in the coffer at the end of December. If we don't spend it, we're not going to get it next year. That's a common thing you see because it comes from a different pocket. You can't take that money and recycle it into operations for next year. So regretfully, it's a huge capital expense for the robot, and it just wasn't in the radar. He's a very good friend of mine. We fly a lot. I'm a pilot also, and he's a pilot. And we were on a flight out west to Indiana, and we started chatting about stuff, and we started talking, and he said, why don't we have it here? Same question as you.
Sure.
Why can't we just go out and buy it? Why
Yeah.
don't we have it? And I explained a little bit how things go and why we don't have it. Oh, by the way, we were on autopilot when we were talking. It's not like we were distracted from our flying. And then at the end of it, he said, and he had some good close friends, and he said, we need this here. We have to make this happen. From there, it went to the foundation. It went to other surgeons, and we found other surgeons that had a need for a robot, got pitched to the administration, and it just got legs of its own and grew over a several-year period. And but it gives you an idea of how these things start up.
So it's not like one squeaky wheel. It's kind of like an orchestra of squeaky wheels in a sense, right? Like, and is it a matter of, different stakeholders talking and going like, oh yeah, I've heard about this. We've all kind of heard whispers. And I'll use this robot in particular as an example, where it starts to kind of build its own momentum in a sense.
It did. And you have to build the momentum because, when you invest that kind of money, you need to get as much use out of it as possible. Having one surgeon in the entire institution, a massive institution, using a particular device at $5 million is not good use of money. But when you have multiple departments having synergies to use it together with their patients, then you start getting, if I'm going to use a commercial term, an ROI on it, a good return on investment. And so these synergies bring it together. But it just doesn't stop there. You need buy-in from the government and the hospital to say, okay, once you get it, we're going to operate it for you. And the foundation has certain rules as to how much they'll fund as far as operations and whatnot. And then the biggest thing, I can tell you, we have a machine, this was years ago, that smashes kidney stones in my profession. They have 2 in the province. They put a 3rd one in Ottawa, installed it, ready to go, didn't have the staffing to run it. So that's a huge part of the equation when you start thinking of this, is you start thinking of staffing. We need physicians to operate the robot.
Who's going to hold the keys to this thing? Who's pressing go on this bad boy?
Who's pressing go on it? Who's going to operate on it? You need some talent to operate a device like that.
Doesn't have autopilot? I thought it was like an airplane.
Regretfully, it doesn't have autopilot. I wish it did. But it's a bit of the catch-22. There's a lot of great robotic surgeons out there we'd love to have in our region, but you need a robot to attract them in there. But then again, the other side, if we have the robotic surgeons, it's a lot easier to make a business case to buy a robot. So in this case, I'll give you right in my own profession. I'm a urologist by profession, culture, you know that. And within months after we got the robot, we got 2 amazing robotic surgeons, fresh out, newly graduate, state-of-the-art, joined our program. It was phenomenal. And the draw was that robot.
Well, that's what I want to know. And I'm curious, Steve, from a foundation perspective, how much of the calculus is, okay, we've got enough staff to run this, right? We've got a couple of physicians, a couple of experts who can run this thing. But we think based on, another market where it attracted X amount of people, or based on a previous piece of equipment we bought that attracted X amount of people. How much does that factor into the equation here? And is that a fairly common thing where part of it is we want to buy this piece of equipment, but we also want to attract more healthcare providers?
Attracting talent is one of the reasons we raise support for the equipment that we do. It's well known across the country that the communities with the best healthcare are those that are the most supportive of their community hospital foundations. And an extension of that, one of the benefits of it is it's not only about the equipment and technology caring for patients, it helps those hospitals attract talent. And to go back to what you asked earlier about why does it work this way, 39.6%, that's the amount of the provincial budget right now that's dedicated for the health sector. It's by far the biggest portion. Healthcare is really expensive, it's really complex, and the reality is at the end of the day, if you want your local hospital to have a surgical robot, if you want your local hospital, in this case regional, to bring in a PET CT scanner, the community has to step up and support it. Government funding, again, already the biggest portion of the provincial budget, goes a long way to funding operations, but at the end of the day, it keeps things adequate. If you want excellent healthcare in your community, if you want to equip professionals, talented professionals like Dr. Mather, that's why foundations exist in this country, and that's why it's so important to support them. And that's what we're talking about today.
You've mentioned the robot. What are some other just like really cool kind of life-changing purchases you've made or plan on making?
You commented on it earlier. We're bringing a PET CT scanner to Durham Region for the first time.
Yeah, I've seen the room where it's going to live, and it's just so cool. Like I mean,
It's impressive.
I was getting PET scans all the time, and you'd have to go, or PET CT scans all the time. You'd have to go to Princess Margaret or into the city in general. And like, that's a schlep. But you add like, you're dying of cancer. I don't know. Yeah. I can attest 0 out of 10, not a fan. You're tired. You don't want to have to add that to the already giant heap of BS you have to deal with. So like that in particular, and I know that was a lot of money as well. That's going to change lives. That's going to save lives.
Without question. The nearest scanners are in Toronto and Ottawa, to give you a geographic frame of reference.
Yeah.
And the last piece, you would have had lab work done throughout your care, Coulter. And we are bringing in the next wave, the new generation of digital pathology.
So what does that look like?
It is about digitizing lab slides so they can be seen on screen, shared with experts beyond the walls of the cancer center itself. It leads to better diagnoses, more expertise involved, more analysis. Dr. Mather could probably expand on that further.
Yeah, I mean, it's...
But what does it look like now? Like, take us from what it looks like now to what it's going to look like.
There is some partial digitization now, but what basically we do now, and I'm not an expert in lab pathology, but when I take a specimen of the patient, it gets sent to the lab, it's treated with certain stains and whatnot, it's sliced super thin, put on slides, and put under a microscope and examined. Some of the microscopes nowadays have cameras on them. But when you take the whole process and you digitize it, and you think of when we went from film cameras to digital cameras and use something as simple as Photoshop or Lightroom on a computer, and what we can enhance and pull out of the images, that is where we can take pathology to the next level, to find disease in tissue and specimens, to be able to process the tissues faster. There are times now it could take days, if not a week or two, to get specimens.
Oh, and the anxiety.
And you're sitting there biting every single nail.
Yeah.
And if we can speed up that process, it's outside the scope of this discussion, but I could sit here for a long time talking about AI influence on that too, which will be massive. AI is going to do wonders. And is probably going to really move the needle in healthcare. There will be some cautions there we'll have to be careful about, like any other part of AI's involvement in society.
You don't want it to go evil.
But
evil AI, I'm worried about. That's what I'm worried about.
But so and to talk to you, just what you said a second ago, that whole concept of going to Toronto to get those scans, it's a tough drive nowadays in the best of times, let alone when you're sick.
Yeah.
It comes back to a big part of the campaign that Steve and the team did about trying to bring healthcare back home. And, the 1960s, things changed when we went to a public healthcare system and the NDP brought it in.
Sure.
And we went through the last 50, 60 years of everything covered. Well, our taxes pay for it. But there's that sense of, I don't want to use the word entitlement, but, feeling that, well, the healthcare is going to pay for it. Government's going to pay for it, and just leave it at that. Hospitals paid for by the government, et cetera.
From whose perspective do you mean?
From the patient's perspective.
Right.
Sorry. Go back before 1960s, and what was it like? Let's go back 100 years, and what was?
Let's not.
But what was it like back then? You had a community. Let's say something small like Oshawa, which might have been 30, 40,000 people.
Sure.
They'd attract through various means a physician, usually a generalist doctor. And they would help bring them in, maybe get them a house and this and that, and say, we're going to build you a small hospital. We will build you a hospital. There was no government money coming in for that in those times. So the community would get together over a period of time, raise the money, and sometimes even have their own local tradesmen and whatnot build by hand a hospital and then run the hospital. It was a community venture.
So there's history to this.
Schools were like that. So we got a little bit away from that in the 60s and 70s because everything came from the government. You just sat back and you didn't think about it because the government built you the hospital, paid for the drugs, paid for the equipment. And my feeling is now at multiple levels, both because I work there, all my family goes there. It's my parents are treated with cancer, knee replacements, you name it. My kids were born there. So at multiple levels, I have an attraction of the hospital that it's mine. I generate a living out of it. It pays for my kids going to college. I get my parents now at 90 years of age. My dad just turned 90 a few weeks ago.
Congratulations to Dad.
Thank you. Because of that hospital, because he was treated there. And so it's my hospital. So I have a feeling of that I should get involved, whether it's something as simple as going out for a fundraising, whether it might be helping at a pancake flipping, or whether it's writing a big check. At whatever level I can, I feel I'm giving it to myself.
You've got ownership.
I've got ownership. I got skin in the game, and that sentiment was lost for a period of time when we got that sense of entitlement. But now, I had to give a lot of props to the current management at the foundation. They brought that sentiment back to the institution and are bringing it back in the region, in the population.
Well, Steve, how does that make you feel? You gave him the man his flowers. How does that make you feel?
We overuse the word in what we do, but incredible.
Yeah.
It's amazing to hear that.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah. there are many different ways that money comes into you. And I think a lot of people, when they hear the word fundraising, either have no idea what it is at all, or have maybe a quaint idea of like a bake sale or a lemonade stand or a car wash, depending on the demographic. It's more than just those things. It's more than just one thing in particular. Like, when you think of fundraising from a holistic viewpoint, like what does that look like? And get specific, like I'm talking minute by minute here.
Sure. It goes beyond asking people for money. It's about having conversations with individuals, businesses, other foundations about what their money's going to do. We've talked about impact many times here today. So if you're setting up a fundraising organization, you have to recognize that many people will give in many different ways. And you'll recognize that for one person, their $50 gift is the equivalent to someone else's $50,000 gift.
It's all relative.
And you need to meet with all of those individuals and treat them all as well as you can with regard to their gift, because every donor's gift is special, regardless of the amount. So in fundraising, we have annual giving, as I said to you earlier. And yes, there are what we call our third-party initiatives, our events. So, two kids doing a lemonade stand on their street corner to raise funds for the Cancer Center is one example. And then it goes into other areas, such as we call it in the business, if you will, major gifts. So those who give typically $10,000 or more, that make the significant commitments. But again, someone's $50,000 gift might be the same as someone's $50 gift.
Yeah.
Another area that's having an incredible impact on the care at our hospital is through what we call plan giving. And plan giving has a few different ways of coming about. In most cases, not all, but in many cases, it's someone leaving a gift in their will.
So what does that conversation look like or sound like, I guess?
With the donor during their lifetime or with their estate trustee?
What's your sell when you're like, okay, listen, maybe you don't have the cash today, but we're all going to die, right? It's going to happen, every single one of us. And if you have a couple of bucks left over at the end of it, we would be honored if you would spread some of that love in our direction. How do you market that?
We communicate that your legacy matters. You can very likely give more through your estate than you could ever give during your lifetime, especially if you're someone who's lived in the same house your entire life, et cetera. So we communicate that individuals' legacies matter, that they can have an incredible impact on their community for years and years to come, help future generations. And as we're talking about this, I'm thinking of one story. We recently received a estate gift that was just shy of $2 million.
Damn. A lot of incubators.
A lot of incubators. The individual himself worked at one of the local automotive facilities in Durham region. His father worked in the kitchen at Lake Ridge Health Oshawa for 40 years. So this was, for lack of a better way of putting it, a blue-collar family. They had a couple of homes over the years, and by the time of his passing, he had amassed a significant amount of wealth. And he himself, like you, had been a patient at the Cancer Center. So he left the residue from his estate to our charity. Incredible impact.
Yeah.
And what happens with regard to plan giving is many donors who are those who are giving their $100 a year or their monthly donors, they're often the ones who can have an incredible impact to their estate gifts. And we talked earlier about tax incentives, et cetera. Another great way to give is for people to donate their appreciated securities. Because if you sell your stocks that you own and you've made gains on them, you're paying tax on the gains. Depending on the exact situation, I'll keep it simple for this conversation.
On, but give me a situation. So like, I own some stock. Let's say
Yes.
I don't, but let's say I did.
Yes.
What? Like, I can just say you can have all of it.
You can have all the stock, and if you donate it directly to the charity, then you don't have to pay anywhere near the capital gains tax you would have otherwise. So it's a great way for people to give. So if someone bought, I'll just say the name Apple stock 20 years ago, right?
Would that
and
was
they
us.
donated it to our charity, they wouldn't have to, again, it gets nuanced, but they, for this conversation, wouldn't have to worry about the capital gains tax on that donation. We encourage people to do what's meaningful for them. So, some individuals like to run their own golf tournaments. Some people like to do personal page fundraising. That's become really big. You
what
actually
does
did
that
the
look
personal
like?
page fundraising for us when you did
With the
CN
Edge
Tower
Walk, yeah, a couple of
Right.
years ago, yeah.
So there's a great example. So it's what's meaningful for the individuals because some people want to have fun with
Yeah.
their fundraising too. So it's literally in the name. So again, third-party initiatives, peer-to-peer fundraising. We have a team who can set you up with your own personal page and encourage people to support you in doing whatever you're doing, whatever activity it might be, whatever competition you're doing. We have others, such as members of my family who they like getting their letter and they like giving in response to the letter. So, that's a straightforward, what we call direct mail donor in the sector. The list goes on, but there are so many different ways to give. And again, we welcome all of it and we encourage all of it. And it's about what's meaningful to the individuals in the community.
You mentioned something a moment ago, and I think I understand. If you wanted to put on an event, for instance,
Yes.
You see charity golf tournaments or whatever. What are the logistics with that? Somebody just calls Steve and says, I want to do this.
What would happen in that case typically is someone's a golfer, they understand the game well, they have a good relationship with a golf club. The golf clubs themselves they know how to put on these events. So you have the individual who will rally some friends and relatives together to put on their event. They go about doing their event, they raise the money and they give it over to us. And what we try to do is we try to be there to say thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah. It's what's meaningful to the individuals.
I don't golf, but maybe I should learn. Come to
There are
a few
other
of these.
fundraisers too. Some people have, done their own, walking challenges, running challenges, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on and on. The walls of the hospital itself, we have patients in there, we have family members in there, and what we promote throughout the hospital is people getting involved with what we call our Circle of Gratitude program. And that's an opportunity for someone to make a donation in honor of the great care that they received or a loved one received. And we have pins that those being recognized received. As an example, Dr. Mather has received several pins through that program because people are giving in honor of the care he provided. So they're giving in honor of him through our Circle of Gratitude program. And that's part of what helps spread the word about what the foundation does to the hospital as well, because it gets more medical professionals themselves in tune with what the foundation's doing. And then they will be talking to patients about, oh yes, this equipment I'm using right now was funded by the foundation. It's part of the from the inside out marketing, if you will, from the ground up, if you will.
Thanks to Stephen McDonald and Dr. Arun Mather for joining us on Brace for Impact, presented by Lake Ridge Health Foundation. And a big thank you to Petley Hair Insurance Brokers for letting us film this episode at their location in Oshawa. The space is amazing, and so are the people that work there. We want to give you a sneak peek behind-the-scenes look on how donor support makes all of this happen. We want to inspire you. We want to motivate you to make a difference in your own way, because it's people like you that are making a difference in this community. My name is Colter Bouchard. Join me by giving or getting involved at braceforimpactpod.ca.